Part 2 of feeling. Although feeling is an independent function in itself, it may lapse into a state of dependence upon another function, upon thinking, for instance, whereby a feeling is produced which is merely kept as an accompaniment to thinking, and is not repressed from consciousness only in so far as it fits in with the intellectual associations. Okay, so I think this is, again, if we remember that feeling is the process by which we form value judgments, so this is saying that, thinking can come first, so a detached, disinterested passing out, or an organization of facts, maybe, or logic that isn't based on what the person personally believes or feels about that or the conclusion, and then a value judgment being made determined by the correctness of the logic or the correctness of the idea. So the correctness is first perceived, and then a person will attach the value judgment afterwards. So maybe this occurs when, all right, let's take the argument of the existence of God, okay? So somebody might argue the logic for that, but they don't really care about the outcome. They're just turning up and they are presenting their argument for or against. And they are so disinterested in the result that if somebody then agrees with their logic, they might go back and argue from the other side of the coin, like playing the devil's advocate. Then once they've passed all of the arguments out, they may come to the conclusion that, well, it looks as though God probably doesn't exist. And then they attach the value judgment to it. Well, I can't prove that God exists, therefore believing in God is ridiculous. Okay. Whereas somebody who comes from the point of view of feeling, so they may feel, okay, I don't know whether God exists or not, but I've decided that my values are that I'm not going to judge or think negatively about people who don't believe the same as me. And then they get into the logical arguments for and against God, and they'll say, okay, well, they come to the same conclusion, so it looks like God doesn't exist. But they're not then deciding what their value judgment is on those people after the fact, after they've decided that they don't think God exists. Their value judgment came before that. So it's whether or not passing out that argument logically as to whether he exists or not, is that going to affect their value judgment upon people who do believe he exists? If that makes sense. It is important to distinguish abstract feeling from ordinary concrete feeling, for just as the abstract concept, thinking, does away with the differences of the things embraced in it, so abstract feeling, by being raised above the differences of the individual feeling values, establishes a mood or state of feeling which embraces and therewith abolishes the different individual values. Thus, just as thinking marshals the conscious contents under concepts, feeling arranges them according to their value. Listen to that again. Thinking marshals the conscious contents under concepts. Okay, so thinking organizes conscious contents into categories of concepts. And then feeling comes in and arranges those concepts and contents according to their value. So that's where the subjective part comes in. The more concrete the feeling, the more subjective and personal the value it confers. But the more abstract the feeling, the more general and objective is the value it bestows. Just as a completely abstract concept no longer coincides with the individuality and peculiarity of things, only revealing their universality and indistinctness, so too the completely abstract feeling no longer coincides with the individual instant and its feeling quality, but only with the totality of all instants and their indistinctness. Accordingly, feeling, like thinking, is a rational function, since, as is shown by experience, values in general are bestowed according to the laws of reason, just as concepts in general are framed after the laws of reason. So here's where you'll often hear in the MBTI community, but also in everyday life, I've certainly noticed it, this kind of paradigm between thinking and feeling. That really famous saying, the facts don't care about your feelings. Feelings are not facts. Well, actually, this is saying both feeling and thinking are rational processes. They're both rational processes because both of them have been subjected to the law of reason, just as concepts in general are framed after the laws of reason. Okay, so the way that thinking organizes conscious contents under concepts, feeling arranges them according to their value. So both functions are arranging conscious contents. The conscious contents that are being arranged by thinking are then put under concepts. They're put into a conceptual categories, so that it's almost like concrete facts are taken by thinking and organized into an abstract form, and abstract feelings are taken and given a value judgment, thereby making them more concrete. So you can see how the thinking and feeling processes are balancing each other out, and also the abstract ideas and concrete ideas are being balanced out. So they're adding abstractness to the concrete and adding concrete value to the abstract. So therefore there's no argument to say that thinking is a more rational, more objective, or better way of parsing things out. Like, feeling is just as valid in that way because it self-balances, but in the opposite way. I think that's what it's saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. Naturally, the essence of feeling is not characterized by the foregoing definitions. They only serve to convey its external manifestations. The conceptual capacity of the intellect proves incapable of formulating the real nature of feeling in abstract terms, since thinking belongs to a category quite incommensurable with feeling. In fact, no basic psychological function whatsoever can be completely expressed by any other one. Yeah, so again, we're trying to explain what feeling is using words. Like we're using thinking. I'm not using my feeling to explain the concept a feeling right now. I don't know what I'm using. I'd love to know. If you're explaining a function by using another function, you can't you can't perfectly explain it. So that's why if I really want to understand something, like for example, if I wanted to understand introverted intuition, okay, so I can hear the words that describe it, and even if it's really logically sound and I understand all those words, I will still take those words, do something with them in my mind, and I will imagine myself in a certain scenario, and I'll try and feel, well, he calls it feeling into, Jung calls it feeling into. I'll try and feel into that imaginary scenario and try and imagine myself as being in a state of introvertedly intuiting, and I understand it in a way of, oh, that's how it feels, that's how I perceive it when it happens. I remember last time I was using that, it was in this context, and that's how it felt. I'm using my imagination. I use my imagination to understand things, okay? So sound, words, and logical arguments are great because it's very clear. But what actually gets me to understand is to take those words and turn it into an imaginary concept where I can feel the feelings, sometimes the emotion, but it's almost like I'm imagining a scenario and playing it out in my mind. It's like a role play. So I get to actually experience that. And then my understanding comes from having experienced that, even though I hadn't actually experienced it, but in my head I have. This circumstance is responsible for the fact that no intellectual definition will ever be able to render the specific character of feeling in any adequate measure. The mere fact that feelings are classified adds nothing to the understanding of their nature, because even the most exact classification will be able to yield only that intellectually seizable content to which or with which our feelings appear connected, but without thereby apprehending the specific nature of feeling. Yeah. So it's almost like saying, you can explain something in really complex terms, and then, you can whittle the language down and make it so concise and eloquent and easily understood by all, but that still doesn't give the overall picture of what something is. Thus, however many varying and intellectually seizable classes of contents there may be, just as many feelings can be differentiated without ever arriving at an exhaustive classification of feelings themselves, because beyond every possible class of contents accessible to the intellect, there still exists feelings which are beyond intellectual classification. The very idea of a classification is intellectual, and therefore incommensurable with the nature of feeling. Hence we must content ourselves with attempts to define the limits of the concept. The nature of a feeling valuation may be compared with intellectual apperception as an apperception of value. An active and a passive feeling apperception can be distinguished. The passive feeling act is characterized by the fact that a content excites or attracts the feeling. It compels a feeling participation on the part of the subject. The active feeling act, on the contrary, confers value from the subject. It is a deliberate evaluation of contents in accordance with feeling and not in accordance with intellectual intention. Hence, active feeling is a directed function, an act of will, as for instance, loving as opposed to being in love. Ooh. Yeah, okay. This latter state would be undirected, passive feeling, as indeed the ordinary colloquial term suggests, since it describes the former as activity and the latter as a condition. Undirected feeling is feeling intuition. Oh, okay. So directed feeling. All right. So I can choose to feel loving towards somebody. All right. Now, some people might say that that's not real. It's unnatural because it's forced. Whereas actually being in love with a person, that's real because it's not forced. It's happening despite me. It's a condition that I'm in rather than something that is directed and intentional. But why are we why do we tend to give credence to one and not the other? If I'm purposefully directing loving feelings to occur, I mean, how you could do that is changing your thoughts, concentrating on nice things about a person. However that feeling of love is triggered off deliberately, how is that more valid and more real than what Carl Jung's calling intuitive feelings that are arising without you directing them, that are just a state that you're in? There does seem to be this notion of, well, you're faking the feeling, so it's not real. But if you really feel it, or what he's saying, you're intuitively feeling something, that means that it's real. I don't know if I agree with that. There doesn't seem to be an argument here in favour of one or the other, saying that one's more real than another. I just wanted to insert another idea here about this feeling of, about the idea of directed feeling and intuitive feeling, which arises and you're in the condition of feeling, as opposed to the consciousness of feeling, or the choosing of a feeling. So I just went down the route of comparing, well, what it said in the book was comparing the idea of being in love to the idea of loving in an action. But if we go back to the idea of feeling being based around the idea of value judgments, so I've experienced this before where for whatever reason, I'm not sure what the reasons are, but I won't get into those, but I have found myself in a place where I have bought into a particular ideology, let's say, and anything that comes up in the world, or anything that people say that go against this ideology that I've chosen to buy into, triggers off feelings of anger. It puts me into a condition of feeling angry. And that came because prior to that, I had made the decision that this ideology was what I believed in, and therefore my value judgment of this was good. So that meant that anything that goes against this is bad. And I'd already made my mind up, and I knew what the boundaries within the ideology were in terms of what's good or bad. So because that's already been decided for me, I can relax, and then anything that comes along I can judge as good or bad very quickly, because I'll know whether it's true or false that it fits into that ideology. Whether it fits into that ideology or not, as very, very quickly, I can work that out very, very quickly. Therefore, I can attach value judgments very quickly. Now, we do see this a lot. People have kind of a collective idea, whether that's collective in terms of society at large, or in terms of a very small community or ideology or something else that they've attached to, that comes with a set of value judgments ready-made. Is that person using directed feeling because it's kind of fake. It's not what they would have necessarily judged as good or bad had they not been involved in that community / ideology? Is it the intuitive feeling because those feelings are coming up, they're arising when they're triggered by certain things that they hear that go against the ideology or against the collective idea of good? Or is that just merely a trigger point and those feelings are actually coming up based on something else? Maybe the fact that they have outsourced that part of them and they're having more of a Pavlov's response to stimuli that comes in that goes against the ideology that they're buying into. And the reason I ask this question is because for the short period of time that I did cling to an ideology, as you might say, things came in, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad. I could make those judgments very quickly because I already knew what the boundaries were, the ideology. Then when I left the ideology behind, and again, I won't go into the reasons why that was, but the value judgments that I gave, they started to diminish. So things had come in, that's good, that's bad. And then eventually I was going, oh wait, hang on. Do I believe that's good? Do I believe that's bad? And then I had to start questioning myself. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know what to feel about this anymore. I had to go back to the drawing board and I had to very quickly say to myself, oh my God, how could I get through this? This is confusing because I don't know what's good or bad anymore. Okay, I will just tell myself it's okay to not know. I did live by that mantra for a while. It's okay to not know. It's okay not to judge. Slowly but surely, I'm coming to the kind of conclusion that, it's okay. Like, I might feel this way about it on one day, this way about it on another day, but it's okay. I'm learning. Things are settling down, but it was quite hairy for a while, whereas I had value judgments for everything because I could always relate it back to this ideology, whether it had spoken about it or not. I knew what it would say, to leaving the ideology behind and then feeling like I had value judgments about absolutely nothing. So that was really a confusing time. I'll get into this in another video because it's quite an interesting topic, but yeah, I just thought I should interject with that. Okay, so active feeling is a directed function. Feeling intuition is undirected and passive. You can also call it a condition rather than an activity. Thus, in the stricter sense, only the active directive feeling should be termed rational. Okay. The passive is definitely irrational since it establishes values without voluntary participation, occasionally even against the subject's intention. So that's where the idea of, I know that he's bad for me, but I just love him. I can't help it. I just love him. Okay. So that's the irrational form of feeling. So the intuitive feeling that happens, and it's a state you're in, and it's sometimes against what you know is your better judgment. That's the irrational part of feeling. The directed form of feeling, what's he calling that? Active feeling. That is the rational form of feeling. When the total attitude of the individual is orientated by the function of feeling, we speak of a feeling type. So we'll have a look at that as well, the feeling type. And that is it. So once again, I'd love to hear any musings or whatever else that might have kicked off for you. I hope that was easy to understand. The sun. I hope reading it like this and kind of stopping for a moment to take things in, I hope that's helping you to digest Jung's words, because it's a very hard read. He uses very long sentences. Anyway, stay tuned for more. Thank you for listening.